reading plan. We've been reading through the Bible chronologically as a church. And so the reason we find ourselves in Proverbs chapter 3 today is because one of the benefits, one of the offshoots of Solomon's request for wisdom was that the thing which preoccupied much of his time was to write down the various pieces of wisdom which he received from God and to pass them on. Now this passage, some debate if this was written by David to Solomon or by Solomon to his son. But regardless of the answer, this is part of the wisdom of Solomon. It is my perspective that this chapter 3 was written by Solomon for his children. And so this is important because as we followed chronologically the story of the Bible as we've read it through, we have last week covered a character who has requested wisdom, and this week we now get to benefit from the dispensing of that wisdom from God to Solomon and then from Solomon now to us. So we read in the book of Proverbs. In fact, the book of Proverbs doesn't just contain some words of wisdom. The actual genre into which the book of Proverbs as a whole falls into is called wisdom literature. Wisdom is the title of the entire genre. That's the best way to summarize it. This includes books like Proverbs, like the book of Job, like the book of Song of Solomon, which was also written by Solomon, the book of Ecclesiastes, which is also written by Solomon. The book of Lamentations even is included in wisdom literature. It's an entire genre, a huge section of the Bible, which is given for the sake of communicating from God to someone and from that person to us nuggets, pieces, speeches, monologues, tidbits, big sections, tiny little pieces here and there, all those things to benefit us with those pieces of wisdom which are timeless and eternal and never fading. And we receive kind of the beginning of that in Proverbs, specifically related to what Solomon wrote in Proverbs. So that's what we will encounter in the text this morning. Solomon writes in chapter 3 and verse 1. We'll be looking from verse 1 to verse 12. Chapter 3, verse 1. My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments. For length of days and years of life and peace they will add to you. Let not steadfast love and faithfulness forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. So you will find favor and good success in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. Honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first fruits of all your produce. Then your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will be bursting with wine. My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, or be weary of his reproof. For the Lord reproves him he loves, as a father the son in whom he delights. As much as I may have wished for it to be differently at points in my life, I have become very similar in how I live my life, or let's say the details of my life. I have become very much like my father. Now, I have the great privilege of the fact that I have a great father, and to be like him is great. But when you are young, in some ways you wish to distinguish yourself from your father, just to blaze your own trail, just so nobody can say you only got this job because your daddy got it for you, or you only do this because your dad did it first. Okay, well, I ended up actually living in the same town, going to the same college, getting married at the same age, having a child who was a boy, and then 18 months later having a girl exactly like my father. I ended up moving to Memphis at the same time in my life as my father did to go to the same seminary that my father went to. And then I ended up leaving that seminary and then moving to Northeast Arkansas, the exact same part of Arkansas that my father moved to when I was first born. And I pastored a church, and then I left a church in Northeast Arkansas and came and pastored a church in rural Tennessee, which is exactly the same thing that my father did. I have done, try as I might, not intentionally, I have done so many of the things that my father did. Is that good? Is it bad? It's not necessarily one or the other. And yet it does go to show the power that the relationship between a parent and a child has on the trajectory of that child's life. And it is upon that child and that relationship that we begin in chapter 3 looking at the nature of wisdom and how it is supposed to be communicated. The first thing that I want you to understand about wisdom. If there were a title, I don't usually do like titles, but the idea here that kind of summarizes what we're seeing is a timely wisdom. A timely wisdom. And the idea with this is that lessons from the past carry into the future, carry into the present so that they can change the future. Lessons from the past carried into the present to change the future. If you're trying to understand what wisdom is, you cannot overestimate the nature that time plays in the discussion or the understanding or the concept of wisdom. This is why I had the kids in their white-haired beards, is because the idea with wisdom is, especially in certain cultures in other parts of the world exceedingly, is that the older, the wiser. The wisdom is kind of with the gray hairs, not simply because the hair is different color, but the gray hair represents years lived. It represents time lived in this life where you have both gathered experience from successes and from, maybe more wisdom, from the failures of your life. You cannot overestimate, when understanding wisdom, the role that time plays in the concept or the discussion or the understanding of wisdom. And we'll see this here. The first thing I want to show you here is wisdom builds the future. Wisdom builds the future. First verse, my son. My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments. 10 commandments. Number 1, God, you're number 1. You guys remember when we did that? God, you're number 1. Number 2, don't cut out any images. Can't have any graven images. Number 3, G-O-D. G-O-D. Can't take the Lord's name in vain. Number 4, remember the Sabbath day. It's like the sunrise, like remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Number 5, the first 4 of the 10 commandments are about your relationship to God. This is vertical. You and God. He's the only one. You can't make any idols. You got to keep His name sacred and holy. And you got to remember His special day where you worship Him. But number 5 is the first one in the 10 commandments where the relationship that the 10 commandments preside over changes from a vertical relationship to a horizontal relationship. What is commandment number 5? Honor your what? Father and your mother. Honor your father and your mother. I have great parents. Hopefully you do as well. Maybe you don't. Maybe sometimes in your life you think, well, depending on how my parents are, or what kind of parents I have, or which time in my life we're talking about, it might be easier or harder to honor my father and my mother. But the reality is that that is one of the big 10. The big 10 in the Bible, the ones that it's pretty hard to do away with them. Honor your father and your mother. Now, what is the underlying reason for this commandment to be given. This fifth commandment, honor your father and your mother, one of the underlying reasons that the commandment to honor your father and mother is given is because of wisdom. Why? Have you ever been asked, or have you ever seen an interview where somebody says, perhaps to a successful person, if you could go back and tell your younger self one thing, what's the most important thing that you now would tell the you of 20 years ago? And then whatever the answer may be, it's kind of summarizes the secret or the key to success that they have learned. But if you think about it honestly, there is a way in which the relationship between a parent and a child is very similar to the idea of an older version of yourself going back in time to tell the younger version of yourself some piece of information to avoid the same pitfalls or the same mistakes or to know how to chart a path more directly. That's what's happening here in chapter 3, verse 1. My son, a discussion between a father and a son. And the idea here is that wisdom builds the future. And there is and I can show this to you in like every single verse, verses 1 through 12. A well-known Old Testament scholar calls this the deed-destiny connection. In the book of Proverbs, the kind of underlying foundational aspect of wisdom is the deed-to-destiny connection. Here's how it goes. Look at verse 1. My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments. That's the deed. Don't forget. Keep the commandments. That's the deed. Now, the destiny. For length of days, years of life, and peace, they will add to you. Okay, maybe it's just a one-off. No, it's not. It's actually present in the next verse as well. Verse 3, let not steadfast love and faithfulness forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Deed. Destiny. So you will find favor and good success in the sight of God and man. Well, maybe it's just that. Well, no, verse 5 again. Deed. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge Him. Destiny. And He will make straight your paths. What about verse 7 again? Be not, deed. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord, turn away from evil. Destiny. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. Verse 9 again. Honor the Lord, deed, with your wealth and with the first fruits of all your produce. Destiny. Then your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will be bursting with wine. Deed. Destiny. That's the underlying nature of the wisdom literature, is that if you could boil down some very important aspect of your life, that would hopefully help someone else not to make the same mistakes that you have made. Wisdom seeks to achieve that. Why? Not just so that you can have a new piece of information as if you were simply writing a biography about somebody. The point of conveying the wisdom is because wisdom builds the future. The idea is the person receiving the wisdom has the benefit of not necessarily learning from their own mistakes, but the added benefit of learning from everyone else's mistakes. Wisdom builds the future. The idea of receiving the wisdom is so that if you will take it and remember it and not forget and live accordingly, you will not follow the same path if it's negative, or you will follow the same path if it's positive. The wisdom doesn't necessarily say, don't do this, I did this, it was bad, don't be like me. Sometimes it's that way. There's a negative aspect and a positive aspect. Sometimes the wisdom is, hey, I did this and it worked well for me, and you'd probably be safe to do the same. I mean, if anybody has a parent, if anybody is a parent, they have probably had this discussion. I remember I went to Bible college. My dad has a PhD in theology. He's been a pastor for 20 years. He's been a missionary for like 15 years. And I would go to Bible college my freshman year, and I would learn some kind of very introductory piece of fact from my Introduction to Biblical Studies class, a thing that my dad has known for forever and has probably tried to tell me, and I would say, Dad, guess what I learned today at Bible college. And I would tell him whatever it was, and he said, son, you know, I told you that 10 years ago. And it's like, yeah, but you're my dad. When somebody else says it, it's legit. I was literally helping my son. I just put a basketball goal in our backyard. I'm not LeBron James, but I'm good enough to teach a 6-year-old how to shoot a basketball. I'm good enough at that. And I would try to teach him, and he would never do what I said. I would hand it to him, and while we were kind of practicing, I would do it, and then he would do it while we were practicing. And then I'd step away and be like, all right, do it, start to finish. And he would totally do something else and wing it, and he would never make it. And then finally, one time, he did exactly what I said. I went old school. All you old school basketball fans who think Michael Jordan was the best probably, I was teaching him to shoot off the backboard. I said, try to hit the corner of this backboard. He does. He makes it 5 times in a row. And then he says, wow, Dad, if I do it like you said, it goes in. And I was like, that's what I've been trying to say, man. And there's so much of that same ebb and flow in the idea of passing on wisdom to the next generation. And what's so difficult is if we read this passage, in my opinion, this is Solomon writing to his son. Solomon has a son who will become king. So the wisdom lessons, whether or not this person becomes wise when he becomes king, has a lot of ramifications for a lot of people. He says to his son, you need to be wise. Don't forget what I told you, and remember to keep the commandments. And we read these, and these are all great things. I don't think any of the passages that we have read, any of these verses, you go, that's a stupid idea. We should never do these things. These are pretty good pieces of wisdom. But Rehoboam is the name of Solomon's son. Do you know what Rehoboam was like when he became king? He was the king who single-handedly was responsible for taking Israel at its height and power and splitting it in two, because of his foolishness, never to be reunited again. The wisest man ever, raised in his home, using the words that we are reading right now to try and train him, using these words, raised the man who would split the kingdom forever. How is that possible? How can that be true? And this is towards the idea of what wisdom is. These are not rules, formulas, where if you plug and play, the exact same outcome will always happen 100% of the time. These concepts are wisdom in the sense that they are best practices. In some ways, the nature of wisdom deals with probability. If you were to, for instance, read verse 9, honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first fruits of your produce. That's a good thing. That's the deed. The destiny, it says, is then your barns will be filled with plenty and your vats will be bursting with wine. If we look at this as if it were a formula, we would be disillusioned whenever you tithe to the church, but you don't magically have deposits of millions of dollars into your bank accounts. Our membership would explode if that was the case. It's not a formula. You impart the wisdom, but the wisdom is not only given, that's part of the task in passing this along to generations. That's part of the task. The father has to be responsible to tell the son, but the son has a role in it as well. The son has to remember. And how often is it the case that we make mistakes not because we simply didn't have the right information, that walking this path was probably not a good idea, but simply because we just didn't do it? Oftentimes we can have people speak to us about Christ, about how to live as if we didn't know that reading the Bible was a good thing to do. I think we all know that, and yet we don't do it as much as we should. Why is that the case? It's not because we don't have the information. It's not because we don't have a copy. It's not because we don't know that reading it is, in theory, a good thing. We know this. But it's something different. It's something deeper. The importance of verse 1 is to say, I have tried to teach you things, and if you forget them, your life will not go the way the Lord would desire for you. Wisdom builds the future. You can even see this future aspect in verse 2. What is the destiny for those who remember the teaching and keep the commandments? Verse 2, length of days, years of life, and peace. That's a prediction about what will happen in the future. In some ways, some psychologists have worded it like this, that the wisdom in your life is a negotiation with your future self to make a decision that will not just be good for Carson today, but will be good for Carson in 20 years. Wisdom is to make a decision that Carson at age 80 will be glad that Carson today decided to do. We can make a decision in the moment that serves us in the moment. That's not necessarily bad for us in the moment. That maybe brings pleasure, or maybe brings enjoyment, or maybe brings temporary gain. But the idea of wisdom, especially when compared to foolishness, is your relationship to time. Foolishness is often temporary gains, long-term suffering. And wisdom is the opposite. Temporary sacrifice, temporary suffering for long-term gain. And this discussion takes place in the context of parenting, and there is an aspect of parenting which is exactly that. Your kids require the most time and effort and energy when they're very young, because they literally cannot survive unless you do it for them. They can't feed themselves. They can't provide for themselves. Little Lainey would not survive if Kara and I weren't providing for her. And so it takes a lot of time and effort and energy, and as they grow older, the relationship changes. I haven't had the kids, I've been the kid who has grown older, and my relationship with my parents changes in nature. My parents don't talk to me as much as they did when I was 7. Just because I don't live in their house, and so our relationship is different. And so the nature of parenting is much like the nature of wisdom, where there is a lot of work on the front end, and it's not to say that there's not work on the back end. It's different kind of work. But the long-term benefit, the wisdom of parenting and having a family is that the 80-year-old version of you will be glad that you have children to be your family, to provide for you, to take care of you, and to pass on your family and your legacy and your faith to the next generation. Having kids is difficult, but 80-year-old, 90-year-old, 100-year-old you will be glad that you did. And I've done a lot of funerals, and I've met with a lot of people at their bedsides, and you know one thing no one has ever, even one time ever said to me? I wish I didn't have so many kids. I've never ever heard anybody on their deathbed say, the worst thing about my life is my children. Never once in my whole life, I've never heard anybody say, those late nights were not worth it early on when she was a baby, and I wish I had never had her. I've never once heard anybody say, I hate having a family. At the end of your life, it's exactly the opposite. All the successes that an individual has, they fall by the wayside on your deathbed. Why? Because the important things become front and center, and that is, most of the time, your family and your close friends. Wisdom, especially in the context of this conversation with parenting at the forefront, parenting is like a picture of it, where there's short-term self-control and there is short-term sacrifice, where parents have to make a decision early in the child's life so that they can care for them, and maybe that decision looks like one parent staying at home to care for the child while the other parent works. And maybe that decision looks like child care, 2 parents work and you have to pay for child care. Or maybe it looks like living close to your parents and grandparents so they can help care for the child. There's a variety of ways, but it's a sacrifice because the kids need somebody there to help them, and somebody has to do it. And in the short term, there is that sacrifice, but they're not babies forever. In fact, they're babies for a lot less time. When, as a parent, you are a parent of babies for a small fraction of the time compared to the amount of the ages of your children when they're far older than that. I mean, being a parent to infants and toddlers passes quite quickly. So what will 80-year-old you be happy that you today decided about? What will 90-year-old you be happy that you decided all those years ago to embark on this decision? If you decide, you know what, I need a different future for my family, then make a decision today to say, my faith becomes more important than it has ever been. Not because it is going to be easy, but because me in 30 years will be happy that I did. Wisdom builds the future. But secondly, wisdom guides the present. Look at verse 3. Let not steadfast love and faithfulness forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. So you will find favor and good success in the sight of God and man. That's the deed and destiny connection there again. This reminds me of Matthew chapter 6, verse 33, where Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these other things will be given to you as well. What do you do in your life? Which career do you choose? Which job do you take? Which house do you buy? How do you raise your kids? How do you respond to this situation or that? There's a variety of options. Which one do you choose? How do you know if this one is the wise choice or not? You have to in some way consider how this will play out in the future. And the benefit of the wisdom of the Scriptures is to say, God can, as the person who actually sees the future, who knows what will happen, He can tell you. If you will follow what I ask, your future will be better than if you are a fool. Let not steadfast love and faithfulness forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your hearts so you will find favor and good success in the sight of God and man. You might summarize that as the affections. You stay close to the Lord. You honor Him. You obey Him. And there's a little difference. There's very little difference between wisdom and obedience in the eyes of Scripture. And it affects your affections, your relationships with one another. So you will find favor and good success in the sight of God and man. I mean, that sounds like a pretty great thing. You don't want to live your life so that people will like you. But actually, I mean, nobody really enjoys that people hate them. That's an odd and peculiar thing if you were to enjoy that. It would be nice if people thought you were good at your job, or you did a good job, or that you were a valuable person in the workplace, or that you were a good father or a good mother. Who doesn't want to hear that? That would be nice. Even if you don't live for it, it would be nice. And the wisdom here about the affections is to say that if you keep yourself close to God and to His love, your relationships, both vertically with God and horizontally with others, will be positively affected so that you will find success and favor in both. Verse 5, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge Him. That's the deed. The destiny, He will make straight your paths. I've driven a lot. I've driven far across the country, and you get to certain states, and it's like you're driving in a straight line, and there's nothing. And I have these moments. Look, it's not a crime, but I feel like there's no way I'm the only one who's ever experienced this, where you've been driving in a straight line around through this nondescript territory for so long, you can't really remember the last 10 miles, like how you got here. You're like, I know I've been driving, but it kind of all feels the same. I kind of get lost in this journey here. I feel like I can't be the only one who's thought that. That is the benefit. The reason I can kind of just drive straight and I don't have to make a lot of processing and decisions. I'm in the right lane. I'm in cruise control. There's no cars around me. There's no gas stations. There's no off-ramps. There's nothing else to do. It's just a straight shot. It's some of the easiest driving that I've ever done. And that's the way that the wisdom of God in your life describes the decision-making process. So if verses 3 and 4 wisdom affects your affections. Verses 5 and 6 tell us it affects our decisions. I mean, how many times are our prayers centered around asking God for wisdom about making the right decision? And usually we're praying not between, so this is a big difference between, there's a big difference between praying between something good and something evil. That's one thing, and that's usually we're able to pick out what is a good thing and what is an evil thing pretty fast. The wisdom conversation, the prayer for wisdom is to pray for God to help you discern between good, better, and best, between two viable options. How do you make a decision between two things when both of them could theoretically still be in the will of God? I remember a discussion when I was in college with a mentor of mine, and I said I could go to this school and I could go to that school. If I go to this school, I'll major in this thing, and if I go to that school, I'll major in that thing. Which one of these is right? And he said, they're both fine. You can go to this school and faithfully serve Christ. And you can go to that school and faithfully serve Christ. I wanted him to tell me which of these is God's will and the other one must be a sin. But it's not always that easy. And honestly, if we look at our lives and the choices in our lives as if they were so bifurcated, where there is the choices that I make and the other ones are sin, that really puts a lot more weight on how big of a role we play in the will of God. God's will is not dependent on me picking the right college and major to study while I'm in there. And His will is not predicated, the whole thing isn't built upon, oh man, the kingdom of God is maybe going to survive only if Carson picks the right job. The will of God is not dependent. I don't play a big enough role in the will of God and in His kingdom to be able to destroy it by choosing the wrong college or the wrong job. I just don't. Sometimes the wisdom of our lives is to say that there are two things which both can be in the will of God, and you can do one or you can do the other, and both of them are fine, but you continue to serve God on this side and you continue to serve Him on that side. One of the best books that I was ever recommended by a mentor when I was around that age in my late teens, early 20s, was a book by Kevin DeYoung, and the title of the book, he's a very well-known pastor, the title of the book is Just Do Something. And the whole premise is, stop fretting about the perfect thing to take you down the perfect path in the will of God. There's sin, and then there are other things. And as long as it's not sin, maybe you do this, or maybe you do that, but you need to just do something. And you make adjustments along the way. I changed my major in college 3 times. And guess what? I survived. It's okay. You can change your major. You can start working in a career and then you can change to a different career. I think there are probably some of us in this room who are currently in a job that's a lot different than the first job we ever had. Is that fair to say? I know I am. I was washing cars when I first got out of college. That's what I did for a living, was I detailed cars for a living. And then after that, oh, did you pastor a church? Nope. I sold home inspections, not door to door, like real estate office to real estate office. And I was, take a wild guess, horrible at that. But I did something. And I'm grateful that my dad especially helped me realize it's okay, you can sell home inspections for right now because that you're still faithfully serving your family and the Lord. And at that time I was teaching a Sunday school class where my youngest member was 86. And it was building me, it was teaching me a lot. I learned a lot. Many of the lessons I now live out in my ministry, I learned from teaching that class. God was still working on me when I had a job that I didn't like. That was okay. It was for a season, but in the long term, it benefited me. Wisdom can affect your affections. Verses 5 and 6 rather than looking at the path of your life and seeing all of these forks in the roads and these off branches, the wisdom of God takes those and makes a straight path. Verses 7 and 8, be not wise in your own eyes, fear the Lord, turn away from evil. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. Honor the Lord with your wealth and with your first fruits of all your produce. Then your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will be bursting with wine. As I said before, I have not transitioned into a Joel Osteen-style prosperity gospel preacher. Although when I see his house and car, I think maybe I should give it a shot. Maybe it would work out, I don't know. It's not a formula. It's not a formula where if you come, when the ushers come and they pass out the plate, that if you put in 10, you'll get back 100. It's not a formula. It's wisdom, which means if you are a person who says, all the things that belong to me were given to me graciously by God, and I return back some of what He has given me as a way to say thank you. If you are that kind of person, whether or not you necessarily have more money before or after is not necessarily the point. That's the kind of person doing the kind of things that God would want you to be. And guess what? To do that, to give of your wealth, to give of the first fruits of your produce, as is listed here, that is a sacrifice. In the short term, doing that is sacrificial. Who wouldn't, if you give 10%, who wouldn't like to have a 10% raise at work? Your boss pulls you in, they say, we're giving you a 10% raise just to be nice. That's a great thing. Who wouldn't want that? That's pretty nice. Yet as Christians, we voluntarily opt into giving a percentage of what comes into us back to God as a way to say thank you for everything. And if we do that, we should not and hopefully do not look at that as an investment, as a seed investment, which will return money on top of money tenfold. In fact, some of the best way for money to actually, they say money doesn't make you happy. Well, it's pretty cool. I know that not having it makes me kind of not happy sometimes. Definitely makes things a little bit difficult. We've probably all been there. But actually, is it keeping the money that makes us happy if we had some? Or are some of the best interactions you've had with money when you've gotten to give it away to somebody? To bless somebody with something? I mean, even in the short-term time that we've been here, we have been extremely blessed by the church and the people in it in a variety of ways. When people show up and give us, we've received cards. We receive, one of my friends from Nashville was here, and the Burks dropped by and brought us like freshly picked strawberries. They were like, what is this church? I'm like, it's just kind of how we roll out here. People like have fruits and vegetables and like everybody has eggs, a lot of eggs in this church, you know, like. And it's like freely given. Wisdom builds the future. Wisdom guides the present. Lastly, wisdom corrects the past. This is a unique verse in the whole section. And it actually, you can see it reflects verse 1. Verse 1, you see the phrase, my son. Verse 11, you see the phrase, my son. That's kind of like bookends for Hebrew literature. It tells you this is a section. The beginning reflects the end. Wisdom corrects the past here. My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline or be weary of His reproof. We've talked about the future. We've talked about the present. Now we're talking about discipline and reproof. Discipline refers to actions done when? In the past. This is the first time in these 12 verses that anything has referenced actions in the past. Actions in the past. When God responds to those actions in the past, He's responding to the ones you have done not wisely. When you act in a way that is unwise, in a way that is foolish, there is reproof or correction. And the response, you have to remember, in this part of the world, at this time in history, when bad things happen, if you get sick, if someone in your family dies, if there is a war, if there is a famine, if you lose your job, if anything bad happens to you, what do they think that is? They think that is a sign from God that you are being punished for something. That you are out of favor with God and He doesn't love you anymore. And the way He communicates His dissatisfaction with you is to make you sick. Or is to take your crops, or is to cause your livestock to die, or whatever the case may be. They thought any negative thing that happens in your life is God saying, I'm not happy with you. What does Solomon say? He says the opposite. He says, if God in some way disciplines you or corrects you, it is for your good, not for your demise or destruction. In the same way, he says, what God is doing is what I have done to you as a father who loves you. Wisdom corrects the past. Now, what's interesting about this, my son, do not despise the Lord's discipline or be weary of His reproof. I remember, man, I used to get a spanking. I mean, I never got spankings, but when I used to get spankings, man, I would go to my room. I would be fuming, man. I'd be like, I wish they would come back in here, man, like I was going to do something. But I remember one time I was so mad at my mom. I got in trouble. I took a whiteboard, and she was like, you can't leave the upstairs and go downstairs because you're in trouble. And my mom was sitting upstairs, so I took a whiteboard from in my room. I'm in my room. She's right outside my room. I took a whiteboard and I wrote on it, I don't like my mom. And I put it on the whiteboard and I stuck it outside my room and shut the door so she could see this message, I don't like my mom. And that showed her, you know. She never recovered. Like, it's so silly. Honestly, I mean, you've probably seen your kids react to, you know, to punishments or in negative situations in a way that you're like trying to hold back laughter sometimes. But the idea there that I didn't understand is if you live a life and no one older than you or with authority over you corrects or reproves or disciplines you at all, the reality is that person does not care about your future. And parents in this room, you all know the reason for disciplining the kids is so that they will be better in the future than they are right now. That's wisdom. It is unwise for you to allow the children to just do anything that they want and imagine that they will naturally stumble their way into godliness, holiness, and faithfulness to Christ. It doesn't happen like that. They have to be taught and reproved and corrected. And they'll stay on some of the right course, and then at times, in certain situations, they'll stray off the course. And what do? You correct them and put them back on the course. In fact, in many ways, I kind of see a generation where one generation said, we're going to parent differently. We're not really going to discipline our kids as much. And that did not necessarily pan out that great. The discipline is in service of your future self. The corrections of the past are for the changing of the future. Now, what I see here, what's crazy about this, and this is the way Hebrew literature is so much different than English literature. This is supposed to create in your mind a cycle like this. From verse 1 to verse 12, there's a cycle. At the beginning, my son, don't forget my teaching and keep my commandments. And then in verses 3 through 10, he says, here they are. In case you forgot, these are my teachings and my commandments. Don't forget these things. Okay, verse 1 and 2, don't forget them. Verses 3 through 10, here's what they are as a reminder in case you do forget them. Then in verses 11 and 12, when you forget them at times in your life, God will put you back on track and He will correct you and He will reprove you because He loves you. And guess what happens? If you live your life pursuing wisdom and accepting the correction given to you by God so that you will be back on the way of wisdom, if you live your life like this, you will one day become the gray hair who through wisdom in both experiences of success and experiences of failures, you have become wise at the end of it. Now you get to be the father, the mother, telling the son or daughter the wise words of wisdom that will be the key to success and closeness to Christ in their life. It's a one big cycle. You see how here there is this cyclical nature to it. My son, don't forget my teaching. Here's the teaching in case you forget, and if you stumble, Christ will protect you by disciplining you because he is a father who delights in his son. Who is writing this passage? A father who delights in his son, who wants his son to have a better future. That is a direct reflection of what God is doing to Solomon, and now Solomon is doing it to Rehoboam, and you and I must be doing it to our sons and daughters. It's a big cycle. The wisdom Solomon is calling for his son to obtain, to hold on to, doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from God. It is actually one of the attributes of God. And here's how wisdom plays into God and his nature. Here's how it is. How is it that God can hate sin, have judgment against it, have wrath against it, how he can pour out his vengeance against the wicked? How is it that he can do that? And also the Bible can simultaneously say it is God's desire that all men and women should be saved. How is that possible? How is it possible that he can be a God of pure holiness who desires that sin be destroyed and gotten rid of out of the world, but simultaneously be a God who loves the people in the world who are doing the sins? How is it that he can rectify those two parts of his nature? How can he be both wrath and mercy? How can he be both judgment and love? How can he be both of those at the same time? And the way that those are rectified is by the wisdom of God. The wisdom of God could be given actually a name. The wisdom of God, which bridges the gap between a holy God who punishes sin and a loving God who forgives the sinner. Wisdom bridges the gap, and wisdom has a name, and the name is Jesus. And so may we finish today concluding with the Apostle Paul, what he says in the book of Romans, chapter 11, verse 33. I want to read this as we close this morning. Oh, the depths of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments and how inscrutable his ways. God, we come to you today thankful for the depths of the riches of your wisdom. That wisdom has a name. It is Jesus. It is through him that we have been given wisdom. Living like him, following his example, is the way that we walk in wisdom. May we walk in it ourselves. May we respect those in our church who can pass down the wisdom from their lives from one generation to the next. May we never forget that expressing wisdom is an aspect of reflecting God in our lives. You are a wise God, and to follow you is to pursue wisdom in our lives. God, there's not a one of us in this room today who does not need more wisdom in our lives. Not one. May we ask for it when we need it. But Lord, sometimes that wisdom is not necessarily found in new pieces of information that we have never heard before. But God, like in verse 1 of this passage, may we just simply remember the wisdom of those who have guided us thus far. We are so prone to forget. May we remember the wise words and the commandments of both your word and your people as they have lived it, and they have both failed and succeeded. May we follow them in their successes and avoid, like they had recommended, avoid their failures. God, in wisdom, timely wisdom, may we be humble enough to accept the lessons of the past carried into the future, carried into the present, so that they may change our future. And God, we long to have a future which is closer to you and more devoted to you, that is more like you than our past has been. Not a one of us wants to ever think, hey, 2007 was the best year for my faith. God, it is my prayer that next year will always be a better year for my faith than the one that came before it. And God, let us start setting that precedent, that trajectory for our future, for the future of our faith and our families today. Don't wait another day for us to start making a decision that I will be more faithful, more Christ-like, more wise in the ways of God tomorrow than I am today. And give us the strength to make the decisions, the sacrifices, to endure the short-term losses or suffering or sacrifices as we may need to attain that better, more faithful future. I pray this for each person in this room as they are undoubtedly making difficult decisions in their lives. God, make straight their paths, each one of them. May they trust in you and lean not on their own understanding, and acknowledge you in all of their ways, so that you will show them the path that they need to walk and give them the courage and the strength to walk it. We pray these things in the name of Jesus. Amen.
As Carson's already said, wow, that's loud. Jesus is the answer. Our invitation this morning, sweet by and by. Please stand with me. There's a land that is fairer than day, and by faith we can see it afar. For the Father waits over the way to prepare us a dwelling place there in the sweet by and by. We shall meet on that beautiful shore in the sweet by and by. We shall meet on that beautiful shore.
Well, thank you for being here with us today. We will not have service this evening, so enjoy time with your families. May the Lord bless you and keep you and make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. And may he lift his countenance upon you and give you peace. Brother Chris Parker, will you close us in a word of prayer today?